Scarlett Blade. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Silent Night, Memoirs of a Royal Guard, Chapter 21. Princess Luna stood on the observation platform looking through the telescope. Iridescent, Smiley, Harvest, and I were behind her. "They're attacking the barrier, but it's still holding," she said, concern clear in her voice. "What are they, Princess?" Smiley asked. "I'm not certain. I've never seen beasts such as these, but I have also been gone for quite some time." "A new threat is to be, then. We should warn the captain," I suggested. "The wedding has already started. It is too late," Iridescence responded. She was right, that is true, but we have to try. Miley, get down to the throne room and try to warn the captain. If you can't find the lieutenant, Harvest, go inform the sergeant. Princess, I think we should go inside." Miley nodded and took off. "Yes, boss." Harvest followed after her on his own mission. Princess Luna nodded. "Agreed," she said, and she made her way into the tower. Iridescence followed, and I took up the rear so that I could close the door. We headed down the stairs, thinking it would be best to go and get the princess to her chambers. They were closer to the rest of the house guard. When we were halfway down, when everything started to fall apart, from the windows we saw the barrier suddenly collapse and the creatures started raining down into the city and into the palace. "Move!" Iridescence shouted and took off down the stairs of the clear path in front of the princess. Speed was a critical factor here. We needed to be where all of the guards were. Thankfully, the palace walls were keeping most of the creatures at bay, but the windows were proving to be a liability. When we reached the ground floor and came out to the hallway, it was pandemonium. The row of glass nearest the stairwell had been shattered, and more than a dozen of the creatures had gotten in. Starry Spur, Risky Storm, and several other guards were struggling with them, and things went from bad to worse. In a swirl of fire, the beast assumed the shape of the ponies they were fighting. Knowing friend from foe would be near impossible. "Stay close to me, Princess," Iridescence shouted over the melee, and her horn ignited into a brilliant royal blue flame. From the aether, a dome appeared surrounding both mares. It was a protective spell not unlike the one the captain used, but much smaller. Translucent silver shields danced among the mystical energy and protected the two of them from harm. Iridescence led the way, pushing aside ponies and beasts alike while concentrating on her magic. I followed close behind and helped who I could, but our priority was to get the princess to her chambers. That is the tough part about being a guard, knowing when to leave your brothers and sisters to do your duty. We cleared the hall and found Miley, Harvest, Lavender, and a few of the others staring at Lieutenant Dyke. He was looking out the window as the creatures rained down on Canterlot. Miley called out for me. "I told the lieutenant. He hasn't moved." I rushed over to him and shook him. "Sir, orders!" Lieutenant Dyke looked over at me. "We're doomed," he said. "Look at the city. There isn't any hope." The first word out of my mouth shouldn't be repeated, but after I said it, I wheeled to the others. "Listen up. We still have a job to do, and we're going to do it. Iridescence and I are taking the princess to her chambers. Miley, take Harvest, and 2 others to get the captain. Whatever it takes, the rest of you bring up the rear behind us. There's a lot of these things in this place. I need to know they won't be nipping at our flanks. It can transform to look like us, so when you address another guard, use the phrase, 'Guard the moon.' If someone says 'guard the moon' to you, you respond, 'and the cookies.' Pass the word to anyone who seems trustworthy and hope the things can't talk. If anyone doesn't use the right code, assume they're an enemy. Are we clear?" I said sternly. The group nodded and hurried off to their new assignments. "What about the lieutenant?" Iridescence asked. "No time for him," I said, and moved on. That seemed good enough for the princess and Iridescence because they both followed me. A few other of the remaining guards followed slower, watching their backs. We reached Princess Luna's chambers and got her inside. Iridescence and I pushed the large doors closed and locked them. I breathed a sigh of relief and then started to look around to make certain none of the creatures had beaten us here and hidden somewhere. Iridescence let her spell drop and huffed. "Magic takes a lot out of you, I'm told, and she had held that spell for a while. What do we do now?" Certain we are alone, I gestured to Princess Luna. "Stay here and protect the princess no matter what. Princess Luna was strangely silent. A shiver ran along her spine as she murmured, "I fear my sister has been injured. I felt it when it happened." Gravely I nodded. "Then it is much more important that we protect you, Princess. Equestria will need their Lady of the Night." Both Iridescence and I crossed the room to the alicorn and stood close to her. Probably too close, but personal space wasn't a concern at this moment. The chamber was silent, which allowed us the unfortunate opportunity to hear the horrible sounds coming from the city below and the palace itself. The roar of battle and, oddly enough, an explosion or two. My thoughts briefly turned to Runic, but I quickly focused back on the task at hand. Across Princess Luna's chambers, the large glass door leading to her balcony shattered, and a dozen or so of the creatures flew in. A dozen was too many for the two of us. I placed myself between Princess Luna and the beasts and called to Iridescence, "Go get help. I'll hold them as long as I can." "No, what about you?" she asked. "We're not arguing now. Go!" I shouted, and then got her moving. She galloped to the door and started to work the lock. The creatures started to close on me and Princess Luna. 12 against 1. That was beyond my training. For over my shoulder I felt a sudden heat. A pure blue beam of light blasted past me and swept across 8 of the creatures, throwing them hard against the wall. They landed with a loud thud and fell to the floor. It was easy to forget that not all very important ponies were the same. My VIP was an alicorn with devastating powers. "Great work, Princess," I cheered, and I charged the 4 remaining beasts. "Verily!" she shouted and reared up. From her horn another blast shot out and caught one of the invaders that was moving too slow. In my charge I blowed over 2 of the creatures, knocking them aside, and locking up the third. We went chest to chest, and I quickly brought a hoof against his side of his head and sent him reeling. "Protect the moon," I heard Iridescence gasp. I stole a quick look to the door. There was 3 palace guards walking, and they weren't responding. We were trapped. They weren't set on Iridescence immediately. One of the creatures I had knocked down got to its feet behind me and clearly thought it had the upper hoof. With all my might, I leaned forward and bucked. My hind hooves caught him in the chest and sent him sailing across the room. Iridescence magic flashed on and off. Silver shields burned into reality and blocked bows, but she was facing 3 attackers who had caught her off guard. The odds were stacking up against us. 2 more creatures flew in through the window, and I leapt into the air to tackle one. We crashed into a chair, and I clocked it hard enough to knock it unconscious. Over my shoulder, I heard the sound of a horn screeching across armor, and then a surprised yelp. I watched in horror as Iridescence went down. The 3 creatures standing over her were stomping and seemed to be finishing the job. 2 others were making their way towards Princess Luna. My heart raced and my eyes met hers. I tried to apologize as I turned to her and charged for the doorway. With all my might, I threw my weight against the 3 creatures. I hit them so hard the room spun and my vision went black momentarily. When I came to, I grabbed Iridescence by the collar of her armor, drug her into the room, and then slammed the door shut. It only took a few seconds, but I knew the beast would have reached the princess. She had a hoof up and deftly smashed it down onto the creature in front of her. Thanks Celestia, she wasn't hurt. The others were getting ready to attack, but I was far too fast. Being a Pegasus has its perks. I was able to fly from the door and crash into the would-be attacker before it could even get started. With a quick strike up my hoof, the last creature was out cold. I panted as I looked around to see if there was any left. Things were relatively quiet again, and I hurried over to Iridescence to check her injuries. I couldn't even look at Princess Luna, but I felt her eyes on me. Iridescence's armor had been damaged near the back. It was gashed by one of the creature's horns. Near the back of the flank, they got her. I grimaced and bit at the wound. It would be painful, but probably not life-threatening. Other than that, she was dinged up and bruised, but the stomping on her foreleg did not quite right the way it was bent. Pulling my small fist aid kit out, I set out to work and stopped the bleeding. She was breathing heavily and in pain, but she stared at me, her eyes reminding me of my failure. I finished up and rose to check the princess. I trotted over with my head down. I didn't want to look her in the eyes. I had abandoned her to save iridescence. We're just lucky nothing bad happened. Are you uninjured, Princess? I asked her. Her mane shifted in my vision, clearly a nod. I'm fine, Silent Knight. You fought valiantly. Thank you, I said, numbly as I moved about the room. I dragged the unconscious creatures to the balcony and pushed them out of the room. Some stirred, and I gave them a quick stomp to ensure they remained out cold. Princess Luna tended to iridescence while I tried to focus on the task at Hoof. I needed to get a plan together. It was only combat-ready defender left here. If these things made another push, I would have to rely on the princess's magic until she tired. Alicorns are very powerful, but they needed rest like every pony else. It was futile gesture, but I pushed a couch across the room in front of the balcony door. It barely covered half the opening, but it would work for the time being. I stood on it and prepared myself to stop any creature from entering. From that vantage point, I could see Canterlot. It was in bad shape. Chaos was reigning. My eyes focused on Runic's shop. All around it, I could see smoke clouds of different colors and the occasional explosion. I almost felt sorry for any beast that took on my cousin. Explosions were his calling card, and he knew how to create some pretty volatile and possibly illegal stuff. I hoped I'd get to see him again. I need a job after I was relieved of my duty, assuming any pony survived. Sadness hung over like a cloud, and I started to see Lieutenant Dyke's point of view. Maybe he had known something I didn't. Quickly I shook my head and chased away the thoughts. No, I mumbled darkly. Mistakes or not, I still had a duty. Reaching under my armor, I produced the sword Runic had given me. I hefted it in my mouth and glared out the broken door, daring anything to come towards me. But nothing did. I felt Shining's armor barrier pass over me, and I watched as the invaders were thrown from Canterlot. Cheers broke out in the city hallway. It was over. We had won. I returned the sword to its scabbard and hopped down from the couch, crossing the floor to iridescence. I checked on her once again. Princess Luna was sitting over the mare and stroking her mane. They both looked pale. I trotted over to the door, unlocking it. Pulling it open, I shouted, "Medic! Medic to Princess Luna's chambers!" The cheers of joy went silent, and I heard the voices calling for medics. Too many voices. Despite that, it wasn't long before two of them showed up and carried iridescence away to the infirmary, leaving me alone with the princess. I turned to her and walked over. I finally met her eyes with my own. There was no accusation or anger there. I saw no disappointment, but I felt in my heart. I knelt down on the floor, laid my head in my hooves, and whispered meekly, "I'm sorry, Princess. I failed you." Princess Luna placed a hoof under my chin and lifted it, forcing me to look at her once more. "Thou did not fail me, Silent Knight. Thou assessed it that I was in less danger and saved thy companion. Iridescence may very well have died had you not intervened." "My duty is to you," I said softly. "The duty is to protect the little guy. Learn this lesson well, Silent Knight. Duty is important, but if it blinds a pony and causes him to act foolishly, he may not be able to live with the consequences." "Would thou rather iridescence have died?" The words were cold against me, and my heart ached. "No, Princess, never." "Then thy duty has been fulfilled. She yet lives, and I am unscathed. The spirit of thy code is as important as the writing. Rise now. We would not want the others to see you in this state. Thou have inspired them, and the good leader keeps their own doubts hidden and shared with only the appropriate audience." She was right. I could feel sorry for myself later. Rising up, I straightened my armor and wiped off my face. I went to the door and called, "2 guards to Princess Luna's chambers, now." Miley Hughes came around the corner with one of the archive guards. I didn't have time to figure out what he was doing here. Miley was limping a bit, but otherwise looked well. "Yes, boss," she responded. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Well enough, boss. I'll see a medic later. There are too many others worse off. 2 guards reporting for duty." she said proudly, stiffening to attention. The archive guard did the same. I dared to smile ever so slightly. Good, you two stay with Princess Luna. I need to find the sergeant and an officer. Miley's head ducked a bit. The sergeant is in the infirmary. She got banged up pretty bad. The lieutenant, too. Not that he was any help. The captain's gut had been right. All right, until proven otherwise, I'm in command, I said confidently, even though I felt anything but. Don't leave the princess aside. I then lightly clapped a hoof on the archive guard's shoulder. He was a fellow Pegasus and straw-colored. Congratulations, welcome to Princess Luna's house guard. The Pegasus blinked and nodded. Thank you. I left the room and went out into the hall. It was a mess. Furniture was overturned, glass was broken, and it was clear that there had been one hay of a fight. All of the wounded were gone, leaving the bewildered guards aimless and without direction. Approaching the first gaggle of guards, I stomped my hoof down in their attention. You three! I pointed at the group. Guard duty outside of Princess Luna's chambers right now. Go! They did so, and I pointed at the remaining ponies in order. Lavender, get to the throne room and see if the captain's there. If he is, tell him I have things under control but need an officer immediately. Risky Storm, courier duty. Get the city command building and ask if the damage and casualty ports. Starry Spur, up the observation tower and make certain creatures are gone. Sounds the alarm if you see any. I may not be a sergeant or an officer, but I've found that guards listen when some pony takes charge. They all did just that and hurried off to do what I had told them. That freed me up to make my rounds and collect guards to assign the positions on the floor that the two princesses occupied. That kept me busy and focused me on the here and the now, not the future. Well then, I hope you guys have had a wunderbar day.